It is my honor to introduce all of you to Dr. Karida Brown. Dr. Brown is an NAACP Image Award-winning author and public intellectual. A professor at Emory University, Dr. Brown is a leading scholar of systemic racism in the study of Black life. Her work, which spans over a decade of groundbreaking research and analysis, has earned her both national and international acclaim. Tonight, she'll be talking about her new book, The Battle of the Black for the Black Mind. In this incisive and important work of nonfiction, Dr. Brown tells the story of the many ways that African Americans have fought for their right to education in a country antagonistic to their interests. From segregation to the founding of many HBCUs, the battle for the Black mind is a testament to the strength of the African American community in fighting for what is right and just. In their review of the book, Kirkus Reviews writes that the battle for the Black mind is written in a vivid vernacular by a gifted teacher. It speaks for a generation of students who are asking questions that demand justice and recognition. Dr. Brown will be in conversation with Dr. David J. Johns. Dr. Johns is the Chief Executive Officer and Executive Director of the National Black Justice Collective, a civil rights organization dedicated to the empowerment of Black, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer plus, and same gender loving people, including people living with HIV/AIDS. Everyone, let us all welcome Dr. Karida Brown and Dr. David J. Johns.
Hello, beautiful people. I'm gonna try that again. I taught elementary school. Hello, beautiful people. Okay, there we go. Two things by way of context that you all should know. I'm super excited to be back here. There feels like a little echo. We should pray for the spirit of Babyface in the versus battle. One is that Karida is my friend in real life. So I'm super excited to be able to have this conversation with her about this brilliant book she birthed. And also, you all should know that Karida and her partner, Charlie, call Atlanta, Georgia home with their two pugs. I say that because a lot of you all know that it's really difficult to sometimes do the kind of work we do. Are there any educators in the audience? Thank y'all for doing God's work. It's very difficult to do the kind of work we do, especially in times like this, and it's because of partnership, whether that be platonic, romantic, or otherwise, that we're able to do so. So I want to say thank you and acknowledge Charlie as well, and my fiance who's parking the car so I could be here on time. Y'all will make space for him. And so we were actually just having a conversation in the back that I think is an appropriate place to start. I, in addition to leading NBJC, folks who know me know that I am an educator. I taught elementary school in New York before taking a pay cut to serve as a Congressional Black Caucus Fellow. I worked on Capitol Hill for about a decade for the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, the committee that sees more than 40% of legislation introduced in any given Congress. I was appointed by still my president, Barack Hussein Obama, his fabulous wife, Michelle Yvonne Robinson Obama, Grandma Robinson, rest in peace, Sasha Malia Sunny Bow, to lead a White House initiative on educational excellence for African Americans. And that initiative existed until recently when the current occupant of the Oval Office fired 1,400 staffers at the Department of Education. With the stroke of a pen, destroyed this White House initiative along with 7 others, with the exception of the White House initiative on HBCUs. And just today, a federal judge blocked this administration's current and fervent attempts to destroy a department that exists to ensure equity and force them to, or is forcing them, compelling them to reinstate many of those 1,400 employees that were separated. I say that to provide context. Yes, we should celebrate that there are people who are trying to defend democracy. And I say all of that to provide, this is the fiance I mentioned, to provide context for this conversation, which is important to us. And I started by thanking the educators who do God's work, because most of us know that it is through education that democracies are made or they are destroyed. And so, Karida, I want to start with what compelled you to write this gift of a book in this moment now? What lessons do you hope we take from it? And what are we teaching the babies in this moment?
This book is 7 years in the making. So never did I think that it would be coming out in such a time as this. However, this is exactly the time that the battle for the Black mind needed to come out. This history is personal to me because my parents, my mother, Arnita Davis, my father, Richard Brown, attended colored schools in the Jim Crow South. They were subjected to an education that was not only separate and unequal, but it was intended to be inferior. And I just really wanted to understand, what is a colored school? They attended the Lynch Public Colored School. What is that? I wanted to understand not only what these schools were in terms of this physical separation, but if they were separate and unequal, that means that there was a different educational philosophy undergirding these institutions. And I wanted to know who did it, who designed that, what did they have in mind for Black minds, and more importantly, what did Black folks do in spite of those systems? So that's what this book is up to. It's very much a history, a playbook, and a call to action for right now.
What did, y'all give her a round of applause just for the work, the labor. 7 years is a long time to labor over a thing, but you birthed this beautiful book. Before we get into what you learned about those who design things, right? Brian Stevenson says systems work exactly as designed. What did you learn about your family in the process of producing this book that either surprised you or that changed you?
I learned through my family's educational journey that democracy is something that we do on a daily basis. I learned that my parents' generation, again, they grew up in the Jim Crow South, but they were a part of that generation who, as kids, desegregated America's public school system. So they were in 8th grade and 10th grade when the schools desegregated in their communities. That didn't mean integration. What that meant for my parents is that all the Black schools in their county got shut down, all their teachers got fired, and everything that they understood about their schools that held them was erased, and they had to, what they call, go up to the white school. They were doing democracy for the country. It wasn't the lawyers. Shout out to Thurgood Marshall. Shout out to Constance Baker Motley and all of the legal team that pushed Brown versus Board of Education through. It wasn't them that had to do the desegregating. It wasn't the adults who protested out in the streets. Shout out to them. It was kids. It was Black kids who had to go into those schools knowing that they were unwelcomed, unwanted, and they had to face all manner of hardship and discrimination, but that was doing democracy. So I look at how, from emancipation to today, African Americans keep passing the baton. It's like a relay. And as Dr. Jessica B. Harris says, the relay must be assured. We have to do democracy.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Let's stay in this space. I'd like for you to talk to us about what you learned about those who are responsible for what's often manifested as this binaristic choice for Black folks with regard to what our educational possibilities look like. And you do a masterful job of helping us to appreciate how these two binaristic choices are often expressed through Booker T. Washington and the Tuskegee machine. There's a sub question that I'm just going to surface, which is, was he the original grifter? For folks who don't know, there's another brilliant book in here by Clay Kane who writes about Black grifters and telling the story about the Republican Party and how they often use Black folks. And while reading this, I was like, wait a minute, is he the OG grifter? So I do want you to respond to that. But on the other side of that binary, right, if we're talking about industrial or agricultural schools, think A&T, historically black colleges and universities. On the other side of that, we have Du Bois and the theory of the intellectual, right? This idea that we should also have access to a life of the mind. And when we think about institutions, including HBCUs, but post-secondary institutions more generally, black students are often still forced to pick a path rather than being able to do all of the things. So what did you learn about the people who set this up? You talked about spending 7 years engaged in the work required to produce this. I'd also like for you to talk about the role of the philanthropic industrial complex in all of this.
I'm going to start with the T. Is that okay? Okay. Before we ever thought about a Kendrick and Drake battle, it was W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington. This was the original diss tape, the very first time in American history where you see two black titans put all their business on Front Street and go after each other toe for toe, blow for blow. Booker T. Washington in his defense of industrial education. I want to clarify something here. When we say industrial education in this historical context, we're not just talking about trade school. And ain't nothing wrong with blue collar work and doing work with your hands. This industrial model of education was intentionally adapted only for African Americans, intended to train a generation of doers, not thinkers. Women who would be trained to be domestic servants, men who would be trained for agricultural work. And I'm sorry, the last time I checked, African Americans had 250 years of experience with doing that kind of work for free. Okay, so yeah, the original black jobs. So this dichotomy between industrial and liberal education really was a battle. That's why I titled the book the way that I did. It was a battle that everyone had an investment in. For Booker T. Washington and Du Bois, I'm hard on Booker T. Washington in this book, but fair. Everything I say is accountable to the archive. I drag him.
She has receipts. That's what
all the receipts. And I do that to show how power works and how power moves through systems. So this wasn't an educational model that was just born out of Booker T. Washington's mind that he just enacted on his own. You pointed to the Tuskegee machine. He was backed by America's richest philanthropists, industrial millionaires, and this country's first billionaires. Families like the Rockefellers and the Carnegies backing him to be, like, you call him a grifter. I say he was like the mascot of this model. Why did they want to have a black leader as the face of their model? Because they knew that black folks would be more prone to trust him, to believe a black man who's the president of a university promoting this model. They put a lot of trust and faith in him. So this is where Du Bois and Washington's beef arises, because he and other black intelligentsia like Ida B. Wells were standing up and saying in the public, this is wrong, right? You asked about philanthropy. When I started off on this journey, when I said, well, who did it and what were they up to? Never did I think that in the pursuit of a study of the history of black education, segregated schools, primarily in the South, I would spend most of my time in the archives up in the Northeast, in upstate New York at the Rockefeller Archives, in New York City at the Carnegie Corporation Archives, at the Stokes Fund Archives. What I learned is that those schools in little rural towns in the South were being imagined through boardrooms in business offices on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. So I wanted to make that connection clear and demonstrate how power plays the long game. Shout out and give analogy to Project 2025, that's an example of power playing the long game over decades. And it also shows how radical one's imagination has to be for the other. So I wanted to demonstrate that clearly throughout the book. But what I also show is how resistance plays the long game also, how Black educators, families, and students resisted these systems, built their own, and thrived.
So before we go there, shout out to Black women. Can you read, maybe beginning here, just to offer a little bit of texture to this canvas that we're painting?
There go Dr. John's giving me some homework. And Will, right from the start, they latched on to General Armstrong's Hampton Tuskegee model of industrial education. To them, Hampton and Tuskegee were perfect models for what Black schools should look like. As we learned in the previous chapter, industrial education was basically a more hands-off method of subjugation, a strategy taken from slavery's playbook. It promoted the idea that Black people needed an education adapted to their place in society. In the 1880s, 90% of Black Americans lived in the South, mostly in rural areas. Most men worked as sharecroppers, field hands, and manual laborers. Black women filled roles as domestic workers, cooking, cleaning, and raising white children, often at the expense of attending to the needs of their own. To make matters worse, the convict leasing system preyed on Black people unable to find steady work. Under Jim Crow laws, Black people were arrested for loitering, thrown in jail, and leased out to labor in coal mines and on farms through a loophole in the 13th Amendment. In many ways, the economy of the New South looked a lot like the economy of slavery, just with a new name.
I wanted Karida to read a bit to help you all appreciate how accessible this history is. Too often when we think about the whitewashing of American history, it's done through writing in language that's designed to keep people from not being able to access or process it. And Karida does a masterful job of making all of this easily digestible. Before we get into the resistance lessons connected to Black women educators who you offer tribute to in a beautiful way, I want to talk about some dates. And so 1877, or 1880s generally, but then the 1887 is the end of the Freedmen's Bureau. The Compromise of 1887, you write, dismantles Reconstruction investments that would benefit Black communities, in particular providing resources to build schools separate and equitably funded by ourselves. Then we think about this 2020, the summer of Black Lives Matter, the murder, very public murder of George Floyd, also Breonna Taylor, also Tony McDade, the Black trans man who was murdered by the Tallahassee Police Department the same week that George Floyd was murdered. Then we think about, you just referenced Project 2025. We can also add the America First project to that agenda of blueprints for destruction. And we're in this era of the death to quote DE&I, which we should name as the sort of second iteration of affirmative action, a set of practices that historically have disproportionately benefited white women, but we don't want to tell the quiet part out loud. When thinking about this sequence of events, right, government showing up, filling gaps, addressing and ensuring equity, only for us to then experience retrenchment, and the swinging of this pendulum, what lessons should we be drawing now to think about surviving this moment with an eye toward building the kinds of institutions we know we need for our babies not only to survive but to thrive?
I want to start off by just reminding us about what Reconstruction was. This was a 12-year period in this country from 1865 to 1877, where the federal government agreed that its most vulnerable population, its most vulnerable citizens, deserved a safety net. African Americans in their transition from enslavement to citizenship. This was one of the federal government's very first social safety net agencies. So before we have a GI Bill, before we have Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, there was the Freedmen's Bureau. So the same way you think about those agencies that are also set up to support the country's most vulnerable populations, the elderly, veterans, folks who have disabilities or need special medical attention. African Americans, you would think, after 250 years of institutional slavery, that would be fitting, right? During Reconstruction, what do Black people do? We got busy, okay? Over 5,000 Black schools set up in the South between 1865 and 1870. There were no public schools for Black people prior to that. Okay, we have 45 HBCUs already on the books by the end of Reconstruction. Over 1,500 Black elected officials at the local, state, and level, and even in Congress. Okay, 15 million acres of land purchased by African Americans, largely because of the Freedmen's Bank that was established during Reconstruction. So in that short period of time, if you put into context all of that progress African Americans made, only for the biggest betrayal ever to come. 1877, President Rutherford Hayes is elected based on a compromise. His administration agreed if he got into office, he would dismantle Reconstruction, dismantle the Freedmen's Bureau. And that was such a cruel betrayal to Black folks. Now, how did that get ushered in? Because here goes the lesson for today. The South pressured the federal government, rallying under a cry for states' rights. That was the rhetorical campaign. And whenever you hear states' rights, I always want you to think states' rights to do what and to who? Because in that historical context, what that meant when the states got their rights back, that's where you see the birth of Jim Crow. Immediately, every state across the South starts to institutionalize Black codes. Separate, unequal, disenfranchised, inferior. And that system, that regime, that fascist regime, we say this is fascism here in America now. This is a second iteration of fascism. Last time it was only just available for Black folks. So that ushered in the landscape that allowed for Jim Crow. Now, fast forward to today, we see a similar rhetorical campaign and rally, especially for the dismantling of the Department of Education under what's the rallying cry? States' rights. States' rights. So this playbook that I offer in Battle for the Black Mind and the process, the playbook is the same. So it's instructive for how power worked then, how it's attempting to work now, but also, again, has embedded in it those strategies for resistance, for institution building, and for thriving.
Yeah, to stay in the space of offering receipts for those who have been overwhelmed by other news with regard to the FY 2021 budget, the current occupant proposed collapsing 29 major education programs into a single block grant, including $2.1 billion in Title II funding. Title II is the title of the now at elementary, I don't know what it is, but it used to be the Elementary Secondary Education Act of 65, then reauthorized as No Child Left Behind. then. It's been reauthorized 2 times since then. But Title II is the funding primarily for educators, for teachers, for those of us who do God's work. And those resources provide high-need districts with what they need to hire teachers, reduce large class sizes, and according to the current education secretary, she said, end quote, different states will spend their share of the block grant differently, and that's okay, end quote.
I promise you, we did not go over these questions prior.
We need to. The facts are what they are.
And can I just comment on that really quickly? Because, okay, so states' rights is your rhetorical salve, right? What's the playbook? Step 1, defund. So we're going to gut the institution. We're going to gut the Department of Education, but not only schools and the entire knowledge ecosystem of the land. That is our libraries and museums. Those are our databases for which we study inequity and are able to name that and create policy around that. So defund is step 1. What does that do? It manufactures chaos. Now everybody's scared, overwhelmed, in despair, feeling paralyzed, looking for a savior. That's how you get to step 3. That's when the billionaires swoop in and say, I've got your solution. Mass privatization. 1, 2, 3. That's the playbook. That was the playbook then. They just dusted it off. That's the same playbook.
My mind is now in the South. And I just want to name, I can't recall her name in this moment, but there's a woman in Georgia who is being kept alive while technically being brain dead because, would you say, you know her name? No, that's okay. Because policymakers made decisions that are now taking away autonomy. Right, and so just to finish it, she had some pressure on her brain. They asked permission of her mother for them to relieve the pressure. In the process of doing that, she landed in a coma, not responsive, but she's being kept alive with the idea that there's a baby in utero that they are hoping will be birthed without acknowledging that this mother's body is unable to do the things required to produce life. Those are policy decisions that have been made over time. And you just named the importance of resistance, a tradition that is important for surviving fascism. What I know as a Black man is that there are few things that we have access to that are beautiful and good in the world that don't come through Black women. Thank y'all. And you write in the book on page 112 that Black women educators made miracles happen, not because they wanted glory, but because they understood that the survival and dignity of their communities depended upon their schools. And throughout the book, you write about Mary McLeod Bethune, Charlotte, Lucy Craft Laney, and so many others who literally sacrificed everything, understanding what you have written about, that we have to remember that democracies have to be defended by each generation, and education is its midwife, it being democracy. What I'm trying to process asking this question without asking you as a Black woman to do more labor. But what should those of us who are not Black women know and do as a result of the legacy of leading and resistance that flows through each of you?
Small acts fall big tree. That is a Jamaican saying. That's the answer. Small acts fall big tree. It is the 1,001 little things that each of us could be doing on a daily basis to do democracy, to resist, to build, to cultivate joy, because joy and imagination and love must undergird any movement. What do I mean by small acts? The examples are in the book with these Black women who are the superheroes of the book. Black women educators, like you mentioned, Mary McLeod Bethune. She starts a school in Daytona Beach, Florida, in a place where there was no public schools for African Americans at the time. She seeks out a community that doesn't have a school. Okay, that was number one. She looks for the hardship. She's got $2 in her pocket. She knocks on the doors of the Black and white folks in the community and expresses her vision. That's her political imagination, her freedom dream to start a school. And with that will and collective sense of community, a few of the Black families start donating furniture, start saying, well, I know how to cultivate land, I know how to build a building. Suddenly, we have the Daytona Industrial School for Negro Girls. She founds her school in 1904 in the Jim Crow South. I want to tell you that that was a private school, as were most Black segregated schools through the South, through the Jim Crow era. Why? Because the local, state, and local and state boards of education refused to adequately fund public schools for Black kids. So you had to get it out the mud, like Mary McLeod Bethune had to do, fundraising, traveling across the country, creating annual reports to advertise all of the good that her school was doing. I want to tell you that that school still stands today. It is Bethune-Cookman College. It is now a university accredited in the state of Florida, and this was born out of this Black woman's freedom dreams, and her story, it is superlative, but it's not unique. The book is chock full of examples of other Black women who, and this was an intentional writerly choice, David, because I could have, told stories of a montage of Black educators, but I specifically wanted to focus on Black women who were not only teachers, but who were school founders and who built institutions that lasted for at least a half a century. And I did not have a problem finding examples. Okay? They weren't rich. Not all of them were even highly educated. They didn't have resource or anything indicating that they had the power to do all of that. And yet and still, small acts fall big tree. So what I learned from this book is I don't have the luxury or the right to sit around and say, woe is me. I might feel afraid, but I can't wallow in fear. I might feel overwhelmed by what I'm reading in the news, but I can't sit in despair. Why? Because I have those examples and the relay must be assured.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I want to offer this up as a useful tool for affirming messages for each of us. You just spoke into a part of the book that now lives with me, which is reminding us that Bethune believed in the power of education to prepare her students for life as Black women in America, facing the unique challenges that came with that identity. You say that the weight of her purpose and the societal resistance she faced as a Black woman with power strained many of her relationships. But Bethune, like the women before her, kept pushing forward. So thank you and thank all of y'all for continuing to push forward. Before I ask my next question, I can't find the passage, but I want you to paint a little bit more on this canvas. How did we get to Bethune merging to become Cookman? And then will you share the story about how she talked about her ex-husband?
Okay, let's get to the merging first, and I will I will go on that. You're so messy, David.
You wrote it. How messy? She wrote it.
So, again, it goes back to this institution building and private school context. Mary McLeod Bethune, like the other Black women school founders, were put in a situation where day in, day out, they had to be constantly fundraising to keep the doors of their schools open. Now, these women were extremely savvy. I want you to understand them as educational entrepreneurs. In the same way that some folks in this country idolize tech billionaires from Silicon Valley, they would have been the tech bros from back in the day. Because what are they doing? They are disrupting systems. They're raising money. They're building. They're innovating. They're doing all that, okay? Well, they're also doing it in a Jim Crow context, and let's name systems of power. They're doing it under a system of white supremacy, but also patriarchy and colorism. Mary McLeod Bethune was a dark-skinned black woman, and that meant something. And thickums, okay? So that meant something for how she was able to navigate and move through the world. And nonetheless, she still did all of that. So what I offer here are just the amount of amazing and sheer business brilliance, and the extension of their political imagination and freedom dreams under these contexts of so many systems of oppression. How does Bethune-Cookman University become to be? It goes from being an independent K through 12 school in Daytona, Florida, with the first Black nursing school in the state of Florida also on that campus, okay? But she was always running into funding issues. She had on her board a Rockefeller. Y'all know Procter and Gamble? Mr. Gamble was on the board of her school. Mary McLeod Bethune could proverbially pick up the phone and call these people. They knew her and thought well enough of her to be on her board, and yet none of them wrote the check. None of them wrote the check. And if they did, it was a nickel here, a dime there, just enough to keep the doors open here and there. So that exhausting cycle of fundraising just to exist was the context. At some point, she faced a predicament where the school might have actually closed down. And in 1923, she made that merger deal to merge with Cookman College, and it became Bethune-Cookman College, and she became the first Black woman to serve as a president of a HBCU.
Shout out to her for that.
Yeah. Y'all want to hear the tea about her husband? Yes, look, they messy
Yeah,
too.
okay.
So she was savvy because Mary McLeod Bethune was married when she started her school. That didn't work out, and very quickly into the enterprise. But it wasn't socially acceptable. It wasn't cute to be a divorcee during those times in the early 1900s. So they divorced. He moved back to South Carolina, and she kept his name and called herself a widow. She killed him on paper, y'all, and lived her life out. I mean, she's still known as Mary McLeod Bethune. He lived into the 50s.
And don't nobody know nothing about that man.
Don't
Go away
nobody
from me,
know
Apollo.
But I love that because that speaks also to her business savvy.
Yeah. And for me, it was a beautiful, extra little sprinkle of the sauce, right? Because people have written about her before and have talked about her role as an entrepreneur, but I've never, in all of my years and all of the books I've read, ever heard that little bit of tea. So just offering that for y'all that there's some jewels like that in this book. Related to that, this will be my last question. I want to make sure we hold space for a conversation with the community. Thank you all for the gift of your time. Related to everything we're talking about and a note to our ancestors and how they show up. Right now in this moment at our museum, the Blacksonian, the National Museum for African American History and Culture, there is a temporary exhibition. It's one of the first of its kind in that it is curated across 4 continents, and it's called In Slavery's Wake. It opens with a beautiful montage. There are some words from Alexis Pauline Gumbs, who wrote a brilliant book, who I'm sure that it is available here, about the lessons from Audre Lorde. But it talks about how slavery is often experienced as ripples, where that initial moment happened, whatever moment we want to circle around, transatlantic and transpacific enslavement, but the ripples still affect all of us to date. And rather than leaning into the trauma, to your point about storytelling, these entrepreneurs knowing how to tell a story, but also being savvy enough not to fall into the trap of poverty pimping. This exhibition centers 8 individuals or figures across continents to talk about how they resisted. slavery and white mediocrity. I no longer say white supremacy. Um, I'm naming that to offer up a resource to connect some of these dots, but also to name the role of the artist as an educator, as leaders, often reminding us that we have to constantly defend democracy and have a responsibility to do so. And so I want to do two things. One is revisit where I started and celebrate Charlie, a prolific artist who supports authors. If you all, somebody can find for me, there's a book of All Boys Aren't Blue by George Johnson. Charlie's art is on the cover of that book. Talk to us about your a book cover. Who's responsible for it, and what was the inspiration for this beautiful piece of art?
Dr. Johns, I want to thank you for your luscious acknowledgement of my love supreme, Charlie Palmer. So thank you, husband, for always taking this journey with me. So my husband is a fine artist, but that is not the only reason why his art is represented on the cover of this book. This copy is for someone in this audience. Can you tell me who this is on the cover? Who is this young boy?
No. I appreciate you though, Fred.
This is a painting from a series that Charlie produced some years back called Divided States of America. And it was a critique of the first Trump administration.
Hold on, she just had a visceral response. What you processing?
This is a 14-year-old boy from the images.
Hold on. I want to make sure that we get this.
I'm
Yep.
getting
Hold on.
chills
Hold
right
on.
now. You
Hold
see
on.
him?
Start over.
Yeah, so this is the boy. His painting was in the National Portrait Gallery, and he is in traditional jail clothing. And he was he 13 or 14 years old?
Yes.
And he was sentenced to death, if I'm not mistaken. And it was another modern day lynching, and that is his face. My goodness.
Oh my God. So thank you, sister. This is your book. This is George Stinney Jr. That's who he is. The youngest person in American history to be executed by the state. So at 14 years old, he was charged and expeditiously convicted of raping 2 white girls, a sentence that he was posthumously exonerated from, because we know he didn't do that. George was a little boy. He was too little to even fit in the execution chair. They had to use phone books to prop his little body up, to take his life, to cook him. And they did it in front of his parents. Every year, Charlie paints George Stinney Jr. in one way or the other so that we will always remember George. And because he is on the cover of this book, we will always remember George. You can see the stars on the top because there is a critique of the system that Black minds have to grow up under. But there's also a freedom tree growing up in his body. So there's a lot of symbolism and a spiritual endowment in this book. But I want us to remember George as a boy who had a childhood, a family who loved him, who laughed at some point, who had a life that mattered. And for that reason, I love this book cover. And I hope that it will stay with you all and touch you for those of you who take this book home tonight.
Yeah, round of applause and acknowledgement for George as well as Charlie for this beautiful work. Let's open this up for a bit of conversation and questions. There's a microphone here on the other side of this column. If you cannot or you have difficulty standing, I will come to you. We want to make this as expansive as possible.
Hi, thank you all for being here today. I'm Bruce. I'm 70 from DC my whole life. So I've grown up with Eisenhower and Kennedy and all the civil rights things. And I just want to say I just saw something, and then I saw what's at Politics and Prose tonight? The battle for the black mind, right? So I just watched, and how accurate they are, I'm not sure, but they're pretty accurate. But my heroes were Muhammad Ali and Sonny Jurgensen, the quarterback from the Redskins, growing up. But now my current hero is Jasmine Crockett. And I've been watching these videos on YouTube about Jasmine Crockett. And if they're accurate, I mean, she gets right the same thing as these heroes of mine, where accuracy, quickness, to the point, no wasting time, superheroes. So Jasmine Crockett, that's what got me here, and your book. So thank you for doing this. And I suggest, like Davy Crockett became a hero for everybody in this country, kind of like, was in all the books for the kids in the elementary school. Jasmine Crockett should be the new Davy Crockett.
I love that. Les, if I can take that and offer up something in the form of a question. In moments like this, it should not be lost on us that there are moments when Jasmine is celebrated, but we're often not with her when she's being challenged for speaking truth to power, especially in moments when it shakes people's souls. She now has to travel with security to guard her physical body. There are often threats, credible and otherwise, made against her for, again, speaking truth to power. What lessons are there for us and what we can and should be doing to protect Black women who do the work of defending democracy?
Bruce, thank you for coming out tonight and for raising Jasmine Crockett's name in this space. That's not a hard question. It's a complex and nuanced question because in one way, as you know, Dr. Johns, Black women, we're going to do it anyway.
And will.
We're going to do it anyway. And yet and still, that recognition of the fact that the patriarchy is real, that misogynoir is real, and if we take those things seriously, the ask that Black women be the ones to put our bodies on the front line at all times probably is not the most prudent or inclusive, loving way to show up in support. At times, it's not just not asking Black women to put their bodies on the line first. It's assessing, should it be you? Who else should it be? What kinds of ways, what are the ways in which we can use our multiple privileges? And we all have some. I like to think I have pretty privilege, okay? I'm gonna use that. But we all have some form of privilege. How can you be thinking about that structurally and using that, indexing on that to advance movements, advance freedom dreams? And I remind my students of this quite often because, especially my graduate students, I tend to attract the graduate students who are not only scholars and intellectuals, but they are also organizers and activists. And I welcome that. And in that, I must, frequently remind them, just because you don't see what somebody's doing doesn't mean that they're not up to things. Movements are intersectional, they're intergenerational, and there are times when one's name, image, and likeness or body should be on the front lines, and other times where there's other work to be done, and we should be valuing the whole enterprise of movement building, and that includes our Black intellectuals, our Black scholars. Traditionally, we have also played a foundational role in these movements. So I guess we'll remind everybody, like I remind my students, have that intersectional analysis when thinking about the division of labor in movement work and movement building, and have a way of assessing privilege. That's doing asset mapping.
Yep, I want to lift up another brilliant, beautiful Black woman in this space, Ebony K. Williams, who wrote a book called Pretty Powerful, Appearance, Substance, and Success. So if you want a resource to unpack pretty privilege, there's a connection. Did you have a question, brother? Yep.
Hi, Dr. Brown. My name is Rick, and I am your LinkedIn friend. So thank you for the invitation tonight. So I currently I'm currently in the process of going back to school for my doctorate degree at the University of Pennsylvania, but I also work at the Children's Defense Funds. So I am the policy associate where I deal with a lot of issues concerning youth. I really appreciate, and I also went to the University of Maryland, so I majored in African American Studies. So that's why I was really looking forward to your conversation tonight. I really appreciate the background that you gave about W.E.B. Du Bois and Frederick Douglass, because I feel like currently that's what I'm experiencing to that work. There's a huge, there's a huge, this huge debate about people going back to college. I mean, people going to college or like trade school. That's literally what was going on back then, right? So I really love the fact that how you explained that what's happening today already happened in the past. But my thing, but but what we're struggling to deal with at work is how can in this current time, like how can we as thought leaders in this work continue to gather and keep the momentum going? Because in my in this space that I work with, it seems like we're really just tired of resisting, and that's also part of me the decision that the reason why I made the choice to go back to school full time, because I figured like I don't want to spend the next 4 years resisting something that is not productive. So I think for me, my question to you is that for my colleagues at CDF and in the space of opportunity youth, against when we talk about kids choosing between college or trade, how can we keep this fight going when we're just so burned out and just tired?
Thank you, Rick. And shout out to all my LinkedIn friends. If you know, my LinkedIn as of late is on fleek. I post early and often every day, and I put out receipts, historical archival documents that I put into context to help us hopefully uh, understand our present day, help us get free, but also remind us of all the power that we have with the people. Okay, I'm the people's professor. I bring sociology to the streets. Okay, so Rick, let's get into it. I want to make two comments because you mentioned two things really quickly on this narrative trend as of late, steering black kids, but especially black boys, away from college. College isn't for everybody. Go get you a trade and all of this. Now, again, I started out the talk. There is nothing wrong with blue collar work. My daddy was a garbage man, and he put us through college, and my family had what we needed and most of the time what we wanted. So the message here isn't against trade school, but it's that narrative. Who's given that narrative? Who benefits from that narrative? Who particularly is being targeted for that particular type of advice now? So I think that calls for a certain level of media literacy that we all need for any of these like rhetorical narratives that you start to notice being targeted specifically to specific groups in such a time as this. Ask yourself, whose message is that? Who's benefiting from it? And where is that coming from? Are the ones who are the arbiters of that message following that advice? I can tell you as somebody who teaches at an elite PWI, no, their kids are going to college, okay, and getting 2 and 3 degrees at a time. So, so I just wanted to remark on that. The second point about the exhaustion of constantly resisting and the inequity of who's always on America's neck to cash in its promissory note. Black folks being on the front lines of that generation after generation, one can get weary with that kind of resistance all the time. And I'll say this, I recently published an op-ed in Essence magazine that deals with this, and it goes back to that saying of the small axe fall big tree. I give some examples of what that looks like today. For some of us, we got to dislodge from the despair and reroot ourselves in joy. reroot ourselves in community and freedom and love, and disconnect a little bit from constantly reacting to whatever the powers that be may be doing. And here are some examples that I'll uplift now. The Black Education Research Center, that's housed at Columbia University, a brilliant professor named Sonia Douglas. She built this institution inside. I don't even think Columbia knows what they're up to, because it is a revolutionary institution that gathered educators at the K through 12 level to design a curricula, a Black Studies curricula, to be implemented in New York City public schools. But they went further than that. This is a 520-page document that is publicly available on that institution's website, that is now being used by homeschoolers in other cities, by private schools, by public school districts. They took the resources that they had, small axe fall big tree, and built something. Not because of, not in response to, but out of their own sense of responsibility, community building, and joy. And I think rerouting or shifting our frame outside of that, I worked for a basketball team and still don't know this, offensive or defensive, outside of that defensive posture of reacting to, and envisioning what is the future that you would like our children to live in. Second example, there was a professor named Marvin Dunn. He's a retired professor out in Florida. He didn't like what was going on in the Florida school system, especially the colleges and universities. He goes on FIU's campus, puts out a Facebook note one Saturday morning and says, I'm going to be doing freedom schools from 10 to 12 under this tree on this campus where they're trying to erase Black history. Anybody can come. The first day, 50 people, just regular old community members, came out and they learned together under that tree. It's those 1,001 little things. Sometimes it's a grand act, but oftentimes it's taking what you have. What do you have in your heart, and what is your freedom dream, and start something. Just like tonight, I didn't know who was going to show up, but Rick, you are here. My media coach, Steve Orr, you traveled across the bridge to be here. I see my fellow,
Shout out to you. Uh-huh.
yes, I see my fellow sociologist, the Dr. Tanya Golash Bosa, here. Y'all showed up. Those are small acts that fall big trees, because we understand that none of us get free until all of us are free. And if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. It's time for us to lock in and get together.
Yeah, I just want to highlight for folks, the Essence op-ed is titled Small Acts Fall Big Trees. It was published 2 days ago. And at the risk of being persnickety, freedom schools are offered by Children's Defense Fund, and Marion Wright Edelman's version of Small Act Big Tree is A Rising Tide Lifts All Boats. So just again, want to highlight the ways in which our ancestors are continuing to move, often through Black women who lead this work. I know you had a question, Doctor. Let me ask how many other people have a question. I just want to be mindful of time. So we have 1, 2, 3. So we'll start here, we'll come here, and then Charlie will end with you.
Hi, Karida.
Tanya, I think this is our first time meeting in person.
That might be true, but it doesn't feel like it. It's great to see you. I have hopefully a quick question. One thing that I've been thinking about since January has been, why is it so hard for people to live in their values? And one question I had is just if you could just tell us a story from some of these Black women educators you're talking about, just an example of someone who just lived in their values despite the barriers. 'Cause I think these are the kinds of stories that we need in this time. Probably not y'all, but we can take them to take them out. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I'll answer that the short way. The cavalry is not coming. And if you allow yourself, your nervous system, to radically accept that, then how do you act? Then you have to stop looking to the left and the right for who's going to have the moral courage to stand up and do the right thing. What if no one's coming? What if it's just you? An example from the book, Lucy Craft Laney, a woman born in Macon, Georgia. She was born during slavery, before the Civil War, but was able to access an education early. She becomes a part of the first graduating class of what is now Clark Atlanta University. And she taught for 10 years in the public school systems all throughout Georgia. Okay, so she had a firsthand view of how Jim Crow schools operated, and was sure that at that time the state was not going to do right by Black children. So did she keep teaching in that system? No, she quit and founded her own school in Augusta, Georgia, the only Black high school to stand in that city. Before Atlanta, Georgia had a Black high school. It was her school, Haynes Institute, a private K through 12 school that she founded because she understood that the cavalry was not coming. She got in community with other Black teachers. They created a curricula because they were not going to adopt that industrial education curricula. And they had beans, greens, potatoes, tomatoes, sociology classes, literature classes, world history, French, Latin, and also some vocational training courses. A curricula that would rival an international baccalaureate curricula today. She did that at that school through a private school, and the collective will of the people. But it came through that recognition that the cavalry is not coming.
Yeah, we are the cavalry. Are you coming? Okay, I'm coming to you. Also appreciated the history lesson for those of us whose families migrated away from the South, acknowledging that Black people still disproportionately overrepresented in the South, small, rural, and isolated communities in particular. But I did not appreciate that Augusta was Atlanta before Atlanta became Atlanta. So just also a note for us to hold history with us so that we can always operate within context.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. My name is Justin Kakur. I am an economic professor at the University of Prince Edward Island in Canada. But from 2013 to 2018, I taught at Morehouse College. So my question is this one. How do you think, or is there a way to believe that the rise of AI and social media complexify the battle, for the Black mind? And the second part of the question is, how does the battle for the Black mind affect the U.S. economy, or will affect the U.S. economy in the future? Thank you.
So I'll start with the AI question because I think about that in two ways. Number one are the inequities that we have outside in society. AI, like any other general technology, is built by humans. So we build our biases, our structures and systems into that technology. And that is something that we must all be mindful of for all that AI, for all of its virtues, and the what it brings in terms of access and proverbially layering a playing field. It also stands to recreate those same inequities that already exist in our society, but 100-fold, exponentially. Why? Because it's at scale. Okay, so we must be mindful, and I want to uplift sociologist Ruha Benjamin, whose research focuses all on this, on data justice and technology justice. And there are also opportunities that AI and other general technologies like blockchain technology also present to Black America. I'll talk about it in the context of the racial wealth gap. what is the racial wealth gap now for Black households to white households? Is it still $1 to every $22? Black-white disparity? You can't save your way out of that. You can't not have avocado toast and coffee your way out of that. That is a systemic structural inequity that continues to widen. And these new technologies offer potential opportunities to close those gaps because they are exponential in the landscape of possibility for the growth that they present. So I encourage all Black minds should be leaning into these technologies to understand them, to be functional in them, to understand the economic landscape of what those opportunities afford, but don't walk into it with a blind eye, that taking for granted that they're neutral or good, right? They can cause as much harm, if not more, than good. So we always have to have an analysis for that.
Yeah. Dustin K. Ross would say, read the terms and conditions. Last question to you.
First of all, I want to say that your husband must be the luckiest guy in the world. My question is the author's question. You said something early on. And I've been thinking about it ever since. You said, what I learned from the book as an author. And I'm like, can you talk about learning from your own material?
I did say that, didn't I?
You did. He listened, see?
My man. As an author, so Battle for the Black Mind is my 6th book.
Come on, 6th book. Y'all better give them a round of applause for that. Also, encouragement for y'all to birth your books too.
Write your book. And I mentioned that not as a flex, but
it is.
to point out that, but it is my first trade book, meaning that it's not for an academic audience where I'm only talking to other nerds, me and Tanya just talking to one another. I intentionally wrote it for the public. I wrote it for my parents. I wrote it for my nieces. I wrote it for the streets, okay? And that requires a different relationship to the writing and the book itself. So it taught me a lot of things. It taught me how to be a writer who is accountable to a public, but it also teaches me things that help me deepen my principles and cultivate my sense of my I am and my why and how I'm going to choose to stand up in this moment, because I very much believe, or at least it's been my experience as an author, when I'm writing the thing, it's mine. And sometimes when you're writing the thing, it's you. There's very little separation between that book and those stories and you as a being. But once it's published, it belongs to the public. I don't have control over how you experience that book, over the reviews, what you think about it. It also is now an object. So I look at it and I don't have that feeling like it's me. And I too learn from the book. I'm right now listening to the audiobook and I find myself chuckling sometimes. I say, who wrote that? I wrote that, so it's that, and that's a beautiful experience. And I will echo a second time what you said, because I believe that there are those in the audience. I see you have your lip quivering. Write your book. Write your book. Thank you, husband.
No, let's thank you, Karida, for writing your book. Give Karida a round of your 6th book. Thank you for that. I also want to say thank you to my man, who gave me the name that escaped me earlier. It's Adriana Smith. That's the woman in Georgia who is experiencing something that no one should experience. Also want to say thank you to each of you. Give yourselves a round of applause. Thank you for the gift of your time and attention. Another round of applause to the staff at Politics and Prose for hosting us. Karida's going to stay and sign a few books. Last question is, where are you going next, and how can people support the balance of the book tour?
Tomorrow, I give a talk at Harvard Bookstore, so headed to Cambridge tomorrow. But I will be on tour all summer. So if no matter what your faith, pray for me, y'all. That's a lot of travel. If you are inclined to support the book, I'll say this for myself. So, but I'm talking about Black authors broadly here. We're up against it, y'all. Not only historically does the publishing industry have this idea that people don't buy Black books and that Black people don't buy books. So it is, we're up against a rock and a hard place getting our books signed and published in the first place. But now we're in this context of book banning. We're also in a context of fear where the book doesn't even have to be banned. A librarian could think,
That's right.
could I lose my job for just shelving this book in my library? So there's a fear of adopting and buying not just Black books, but books that are talking about race, sexuality, gender, truth, democracy. Now is a time, if you want to support authors, buy their books, buy them from independent bookstores. Don't just buy one, buy two, one for yourself, and gift it to somebody who you think would appreciate it. And that's how we keep this ecosystem going. I only get to keep doing what I do if y'all keep showing up. And as long as y'all keep showing up, and Rick, as long as you keep liking and reposting my LinkedIn posts, I'm going to keep going. I will not stop. I am not going to be quiet. I'm going to keep speaking truth to power because that's all I got, my mind and my pen. And we're in community with each other, so I just really appreciate everybody.
And that's how we get closer to freedom. Last thing I want to offer up, we will be sharing this conversation on my podcast, which is Teach the Babies with me, Dr. David Johns. So add that to your list of favorite podcasts so you can revisit this with us and grow from our conversation together. But then also thank you, Rick. Not only are you a member of the greatest fraternity known to man, shout out to Kappas, but I wrote down in Karida's book, resistance is always worth it and worthy. And want to leave you all with the story of Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. Black Baptists would say a bad Negro. These are three young brothers who understood the importance of resistance. They were living under the leadership of somebody who showed up like Ronald Deion DeSantis, the failed history teacher turned governor of Florida, who said to them, if you don't bow at the feet of my statue, then I will condemn you to a fiery furnace to burn in. And these three young men, high school aged at the time, said, no, I'm good. I have the kind of faith that says that I need to do what's righteous and what is right. I need to show up like a Mary McLeod Bethune. I need to show up like a Karida Brown to do that which I know is important, to defend democracy, to hold our community together, to ensure that our country is strong. And Dr. King preaches this sermon called But If Not, where he tells his story, and he offers toward the end that he hopes that each of us finds something that convicts us such that we're willing to die for it. I would remix that a little bit because too often we're invited to die, but maybe what's the thing that you're willing to live for? And to discover it early, to not succumb to the fear that often comes with, I don't want to be concerned about what one might say. They might come after my low pension, right? Like things that can be real, but when the consequence is you not living in the space where your purpose meets your potential, Dr. King says that you might have met that invitation at 18 and then lived to 90, but you died at 18 when you failed to do the things that you were purposed to do.
Preach, Dr.
And so just
Johns.
acknowledging that too often in this moment, policies are being constructed with intentionally vague language, such that media librarians trip over themselves to avoid harm. The expectation is that we capitulate, that we don't resist. And so my hope is that we take these lessons from these race warriors, from these democracy defenders to continue to do the work. And for those of us who are most inclined to be on the front lines, we got to learn how to sleep in shifts. Let's give Karida another round of applause as she signs our books.
Dr. David Johns, I love you. Thank you for coming out tonight. And I want to say, Dr. Johns foregoed, if that's a word, he foregoed receiving a citywide award tonight from yes, from the DC Business Council, and he showed up for me for the Battle for the Black Mind for everybody here, and I love you. I appreciate you. Thank you so much.